Today, we're going to interview President George Washington about my new book, On the Banks of the Potomac. Welcome, President Washington, and I see you're wearing your military attire. Thank you, John, for this opportunity to speak with you. It's quite a privilege and an honor to talk to all of you and to speak with you, John. And I remember backstage you said that you had over 80 George Washington biographies. That sounds like you've done a lot of reading. And you also said that you went to my home in Mount Vernon to visit a couple times, and you're going again soon. And you've also written some biographies about me, POTUS 1 and On the Banks of the Potomac, about my perspective as POTUS 1. It sounds to me that you're a George Washington expert, that you really know what you're talking about. Thank you. I don't see anyone in your culture and your time that is as fluid and has the expertise on the topic of my perspective of POTUS 1 as you do. Thank you for taking the time to do that. It is your generation that's going to carry this republic to the next stepping stone of growth. So, you asked about my military attire here, and I was in a meeting before this interview with the commander-in-chief of the U.S. military in Florida, and we talked about the Whiskey Rebellion and the Jay Treaty and a lot of things that you wrote about in detail in your book, POTUS 1. And they just asked my perspective on what they would do and what I would do in different situations. It was quite an interesting conversation. But again, thank you for this opportunity to speak with you. I look forward to your questions, and let's get started. President Washington, what did you think of my book overall? Your overall feeling about it or initial reaction after reading it? Thank you for writing On the Banks of the Potomac. I hear that it's on this thing called Amazon in the book category. I guess you have to go to the book category on Amazon to get your book On the Banks of the Potomac. What I liked about it was you got to the salient information about me and my perspective as POTUS 1 and then also my private life at Mount Vernon. You talked about your time at Mount Vernon, which I love that place so much. I would rather be nowhere else except under my vine and fig tree on the banks of the Potomac. I very much hold dear to me, I think my favorite chapter you wrote in your book was about my beloved Martha. Our dear memories of 40 years of marriage, I hold dear to my heart. You know, we got married on January 6th, and I'll never forget that day and how she looked and the life we had together. She means so much to me. She's so lovely. I think today people can't communicate. People can't talk about what's on their mind because they have all these, what they call today, mental issues or mental problems. And then they keep things in and they keep things quiet and they hide things instead of talking about it and going to what you would call a therapist, or in your time, in your culture, a psychologist, I think, and talking about it. You don't think I didn't talk to my fellow soldiers and to my wife about everything? Man, I talked all the time, and they talked to me all the time. We talked about everything. I thank you for talking about my friendships and close associates and relationships and colleagues in your book, On the Banks of the Potomac. And I thank you for also talking about the politics of today's culture from my perspective about inoculation. And what they did to all of you during COVID was wrong. What they did to you during COVID was evil, spiritually darkening. And I think that only time can tell the ramifications of the powers that be in the international stage, United Nations, CDC, and the World Health Organization, what they did to implement those things during COVID. Inoculation is something in my time we didn't take lightly. We gave body autonomy, we gave natural immunity, and we gave people a choice. During COVID, they didn't give you a choice. They forced you. I hear that's against the Nuremberg Code. I recently learned about that. You talked about elections in your book. The 2020 election was very concerning to me, what they did. You know, I was elected unanimously twice. And I hear that bastard FDR was president for 4 years. That's not what I wanted for this country. He practically ruined it. I know I was for a national government, and I know I'm getting off topic, but I'm old. I'm old, and I'm sorry I'm ranting, but what these presidents have done to our country, FDR, Woodrow Wilson, it's despicable. It's dubious. And I think the most concerning thing to me is in today's culture. In your book, you talked about, I love my stepchildren very much. The kids that came from Martha in her previous marriage, I held them as my own and I adopted them as my own. And adopting children and going into a marriage where you didn't bear those children it's a heavy price to carry, and you got to be willing to carry it before you get in. I was ready. I am ready for all those things and that price that has to be paid to take care of and provide for people. I'm ready for that always. What they're doing to the sexualization of children today is just downright evil. It's satanic. You know, people talk about their beliefs in God, and my personal beliefs in God I talked about a lot. And Mary V. Thompson wrote a good book. I see you have it on your shelf back here, and I appreciate those things and which she did, and the work that Mount Vernon has done to provide an excellent perspective of the things I've done, and the Mount Vernon Ladies Association. Thank you very much for talking about them. And overall, I thought your book was very good, and I appreciate it. And I'd like to show the audience your book about me that you wrote. Put on my glasses. I'm kind of old here. Let me see here. This is your book, POTUS 1. It's very salient. It's on Amazon. I suggest to the audience here if they want to read any George Washington book, I suggest read this one first. And then this one here I hold so very dear because on the banks of the Potomac, John, you so lovingly wrote that chapter about Martha. She's so wonderful. I couldn't have done anything without her. You know, a good, strong, masculine man needs a good woman by his side, just like I had Martha. This book is wonderful. On the Banks of the Potomac. Hardcover is available too, I hear, on this thing called Amazon. So John, thank you for writing your book on the banks of the Potomac, and I know that you will continue to hone your craft in writing. I know you wrote to me backstage. You have many more books to write, and thank you for knowing you aren't perfect, but you're continuing to get better at writing and everything else. So thank you very much for your book. Thank you for your critique of my book. Um, One question though, what did you think of, or do you think of, the modern presidency today? The modern presidency. Let me look at my notes. I have my glasses here because I don't want to forget anything. Oh, yeah, it's terrible. I think what presidents have done for the most part in the last 100 years is despicable and heinous and a laughingstock to the founding generation of this republic. I think that there are far and few between good presidents that we've had in the last 100 years, which I'm sure you'll ask me about that uh, later in the interview. But I think there's been an abuse of power. I think that families that run the world, which we all know who they are, have their tentacles in everything. Foreign entities that I talk about in my last farewell address as POTUS 1, I talk about foreign influence and the importance of being neutral to the best of your ability. And I feel like the United States totally disregarded that in the last 100 years, especially 1924 to 2024 is a proving time. Calvin Coolidge was president in 1924, and I have an idea who's going to be president in 2024. But I think that these presidents don't care. Big pharma, especially big tech, and the military industrial complex has had their tentacles in our elections, their tentacles in our food, in our education, our infrastructure. Why is it we have all these hospitals and all this food and all this medicine and we're still sick? Why is it that we have all this education, all these universities, and most kids in the United States couldn't pass a placement test? It's because of the system. It's because of the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Astor family, the Orsini family, the Cologne family, the families that run the world. There are things that are hidden in our history about the modern presidency that people don't want you to know about. Things that I dare not speak of, things that I dare not share, but they're there if you look. I think that what's the most despicable to me as a military person, the commander in chief, like I used to be the commander in chief, is how poorly the Veterans Affairs Department of the United States government has been handled. I tried so hard and I sent countless letters to Congress for food, for water, for uniforms, for supplies, to no avail. I think if more of the founding generation were around today, no matter what side you would say they are on, they would be aghast, shocked to find what this modern presidency has done to our posterity, to keep them down in terms of education, to just go to school, get a degree, and you get a house and You get some, try your best to go into debt and then do this. Like, there are many other ways to make it in this world, like skilled trades. I never had a formal education. I had a skilled trade of being a surveyor. I learned how to farm. I worked with my hands. I read a lot. I had a library of over 1,000 something books, 1,200 books or something like that. Kind of old, I forgot. I think that in this modern presidency, that for the first time in centuries, in the last 100 years, I know I'm not perfect. I've done a lot of things I regret as president. I've done a lot of things in my personal life that I regret as George Washington. But I think in today's culture, if you don't look at the presidency as a demigod, as this marble structure, that you'll see the ideals behind our 45th president and what they try to do to bring us back to the Constitution in 4 years. In that, if a president really wanted to do what they needed to do for the country to have a good economy, to not be influenced by foreign nations in terms of being neutral as best as possible, to have good energy for, like you guys have oil. We never really had that back in the day. To have lower prices with groceries, to be able to afford a home, to be able to afford a vehicle. It's possible if you really care. Now, I know sometimes there's hiccups and you got to be patient with how things happen. But I think the 45th did the best job he could, and that was a glimpse of what it was like, I think. And there's probably other presidents in the future that will do the same. But in the last 100 years, I think probably the ideals, not the person, but the ideals that this person embodied as president, not their personal life, but the presidential ideals, is what people really yearn for, and that's why they like them. I think only time can tell where this ship of posterity in this country is going to be. I think that only time can tell. I agree. I think that the modern presidency and the executive branch are diametrically different from what you experienced as president. And I think that what people don't understand today, like you're talking about, is that the military industrial complex, big pharma, and all of these foreign entities and foreign countries have their tentacles in a lot of the things that we use and experience today. And I think that there's a lot of good people in the federal government, but there's also a lot of people who want to do harm. And I think that with our education, our infrastructure, our transportation, and our energy and our Veterans Affairs, for the first time ever, Americans experienced the ideals of what the original Constitution was built and its ideals in Donald Trump's presidency in terms of the things he represented, not the person. And I think that's what people really appreciate about Donald Trump is the ideals and the things he represented. So yeah, I definitely see what you're saying about the modern presidency today. With that in mind, who are the two or three worst presidents within the last 80 to 100 years? What would you say about that? I was waiting for you to ask me that question. Well, I think I'm going to do four presidents that are the worst. Now, I'm going to group two presidents together because they're so close together. And then I have two more in the modern era. Woodrow Wilson and FDR. People think they're so great. You look at our culture and they're so propped up for all the things that they quote unquote did that was good. Well, you look at how Woodrow Wilson went 100% against what I and the founders of the Republic were talking about with neutrality and staying out of foreign affairs to the best of our ability. Woodrow Wilson started the League of Nations that became the United Nations today, a gateway of foreign influence into our country. And you can't tell me that it's a little suspicious that the United Nations headquarters that Woodrow Wilson was the inception of is in the state of New York. It's a little suspicious. And then you move on to FDR. That bastard was president for 4 terms. He tried to be president for 4 terms. I dared not be king. We are not kings that sit on marble, but men of flesh that do the Lord's bidding. So why do you want to be king for 4 terms, FDR? Unnecessary. It's a breach of power and a breach of trust to the American people. He expanded the size of the bureaucracy beyond limit. And now you have the military industrial complex, big pharma, big tech, EPA, all these unnecessary programs that are decimating the American citizen. The American citizen today was better off back in the 1930s and 40s with what they were getting compared to what they're getting now in 2023. FDR did nothing good for this country. Neither did Woodrow Wilson. Moving on to George Bush. George Bush Sr. and let's say his son, George Bush Jr., I would dare not say evil, but darn near close to what they did in the military industrial complex. Those two have such a lust for power and a lust for war and bloodshed to kill innocent United States citizens, especially George W. Bush. There is no reason that we should have gone to war in Afghanistan and Iraq. No reason why we should have been there for 20 years in Afghanistan. For what? To hand it back over to the Taliban? What kind of logical reasonable thinking general would think that's okay? Weapons of mass destruction? If we have the best technology in the world and we knew where Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein was, why did we not get them before? Because they were friends and they had a deal with someone in the military industrial complex. That's why we didn't take those people out before. Because they had a deal. So that's 4, but I'm going to say 5. Barack Obama, I would say, is probably the worst president in our modern era. What did he do for this presidency, the modern presidency? And he talked good. He was eloquent, is what people said, but really, was Obama really that eloquent? You talk to him in his personal life, probably not. He probably has the most despicable secrets about himself being connected to the Clintons, which are evil people, by the way. I think that Barack Obama expanded the size of government in a way that the next president could really decimate our country. I mean, he did a lot for people with gay rights. Did he really, though? Did he really do much? Rights that people don't already have today. I think that it's heinous to think that people in America and citizens, it's not perfect. We're not perfect in this country, but I think that people need to understand that when you abuse power like Obama, the Bushes, Wilson, and FDR did, you lose trust in the American people. You lose trust in the American election system. And you saw that in 2020, 2021. People lost faith or believing in our electoral system because of presidents just like that. You really think that with Obama being president that they couldn't have gotten those people out in Benghazi? Really? You really think that they couldn't have gotten those people out? And I'm not saying that every president is perfect, because they're not. You have to own the presidency in which you're in. And these people surely don't own anything. They don't own what they've done. The legacy they've left behind is a disgrace to the American Republic that myself and the founders set up with the pillars, with the pillars of the Declaration of Independence, the Federalist Papers, and the Constitution. Those are the worst presidents in the modern era. Wow. That is a very good answer. I did not expect you to say that. I was going to think maybe some presidents earlier, maybe some of the presidents in the 1800s, but I can see why you'd say that. That's a very good answer. One question I do have in our modern era that seems to be plaguing our country, this republic, is the sexualization of children. And I went at length to explain that in my book and to talk about human trafficking. What do you think of sex trafficking today and the sexualization of children in our public schools today? It's a disgrace to the posterity of any generation. Sex trafficking is evil. I understand today in your culture that people equate trafficking of today to slavery of my time and culture. I think there are similarities, but I don't think that they are exactly the same. There are more people today that are enslaved in sex trafficking and human trafficking in today's culture than ever in my time, in my culture. Look up the numbers. Have people read your book, John. Have people read the references in your book. Have people look up what human trafficking really is today. It's evil. And it's interesting to note that with the military industrial complex and all the foreign influence in this country, human trafficking is at its peak in the United States beneath the eyes and the citizenry who know nothing about it. Millions of kids go missing around the world. and people know nothing about it. Like it's no big deal, but it is a big fucking deal. Whether people believe in Pizzagate, the Podesta emails, Jeffrey Epstein, the Sound of Freedom movie, or anything you see, the Walmart missing children bulletin boards, whatever it is you believe, whatever it is, it's still human trafficking. And it's still fucking wrong. It's still evil, no matter what. And you could connect sex trafficking to pornography online, to the sexual exploitation of children today. People don't think that there are evil people and evil spiritual forces. I saw that in my time period with the war. You think that that war was tough on people? Why don't we look at the posterity of that war and what the founders and the soldiers and their children's children fought for? They didn't fight for their kids to be taught about sex when they're 3 or 5 years old in school. They didn't fight the war that I fought in to have its borders wide open, to have all these people come in that we don't know who they are. Nothing wrong with immigration, nothing wrong with people coming in because they want to escape where they're at. I'm talking about at least knowing. I have several speeches. You've talked about it in your books, John. I'm getting off topic here. But at least knowing who's coming in, why you're here, how long you're going to be here. Doesn't seem that, doesn't, to me, there's nothing wrong with that. Now, if people come over here illegally, I know that'll happen. It happened in my time. That's okay. But you can limit the amount of problems by at least trying to understand. I understand in today's culture you have drones, you can do walls. We didn't really have walls back then. You have walls and gates for communities and houses, and walls and gates for businesses today. Why not for your country? Makes sense to me. Looking at the history of the United States from when I was president until today, you have logs of people who are supposed to be in your house who are on a lease. So why not have logs and lists of people who are in your country and people who are in your business who are employed there? Makes sense to me. I think the sexualization of children, whether it's in trafficking or in our schools, is a disgrace to humanity. I think the perspective of POTUS 1 is disgraced and spat upon because that's not what I fought that revolution for. I didn't fight the war for our kids to be killed in senseless wars or for their minds to be molded to think about the conception of having kids, to change their gender when they're not even a teenager. I didn't fight that war for any of this to happen. I tried my best. I understand the Civil War was fought because of slavery, but I also know the Civil War was fought because of states' rights. And the Civil War was also fought because of money, because of people wanting to get away from the bureaucracy, from foreign influence. Whatever the case is, slavery, absolutely, it was fought for that, and many other things as well. Whatever the truth is, I didn't fight this revolution in the 1700s to have another revolution of people fighting for our kids not to be exploited by sex, to be exploited by trafficking. I'm sorry. John, I am really sorry this is happening to your culture in your time. The Declaration of Independence, the Federalist Papers, and the Constitution of the United States. And I know there's presidents or people who were in charge of the country before me, but I was POTUS 1 under that Constitution we're under today. Those documents, those founding documents, I didn't mean for those evil things of trafficking to happen in your culture and your time today. I'm sorry. Thank you for what you've done in writing your book On the Banks of the Potomac. It must have taken a lot to write it, to read. And I'm going to say it whether people like it or not. John Money and Alfred Kinsey are evil people. If people want to change what they want to do with their bodies when they're 18, 19, in their 20s or 30s, go right ahead. But when you're a teenager, I wouldn't even say in their 19 years old. I would say if you want to do that in your 20s and 30s, your brain's more formed, can make sound, rational decisions. But when you're a teenager, you shouldn't be thinking about that. Maybe you want to wear different clothes or something like that. Sure, be a tom girl, be a tomboy, or whatever you want to call it. But don't change your molecular structure and then realize in your 30s you can't change it back. Your culture and your time have no idea the spiritual, emotional, and molecular travesties you have done to these kids by letting and allowing them to change their gender because they felt like it when they were 10, 12, when they were 15, when they were 2 or 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, whatever the case is. It's evil to do that, to allow that to our posterity. You know you change. You know that people change over 10, 20, 30 years, 5 years. You don't think these kids would want to change their mind and their lifestyle 5 to 10 years after they did the transition? Think about it. We all change at some point in our life. The only way to stop trafficking today is to be honest about where it is in our culture, in our time, to see the logs, to see and hear about those secret meetings with the 13 families and above. Again, I'm sorry. I'm sorry this has happened to you and your culture. That's a very good answer. I definitely see your perspective being POTUS 1 and why that time and that culture had slaves because of the European and the Dutch influence and from the importation of slaves from the African kings and all of that. I think that in our culture, like you were talking about, people misnaming things doesn't help anybody to understand what it was like in your time and in your culture, George. And I think people get blown about by every wind of doctrine from the news with that topic of slavery. And your answer also to sex trafficking and human trafficking today was very telling of how knowledgeable you are on that stuff today in our culture, how you've read up on it, how you've understood that it is as a perilous experience for those people involved as it was for things back in your time period. So, needless to say, what do you think people reporting on this topic of trafficking today, or are there any news reporters or news anchors that you think do a great job in reporting factual events of today? Also, who are in your opinion, the best three presidents or the top three presidents, I would say, in the last 80 to about 100 years? Well, there are no good presidents. We all have things we're not proud of. We all have things that we wish we would have done better. And I think for me, before I answer your question, if I had one regret or one thing I'm not proud of, if I had to choose, because I have many, I am not proud of starting the national bank. I'm not proud of the creature from Jekyll Island that was spawned from the seeds of Alexander Hamilton, Woodrow Wilson, FDR. I'm not proud of it. It has its tentacles in everything in our US corporation. And I didn't know what to do. I was trying my best. There was no guidebook to be president. We all try our best. And if a president is honest and owns the presidency in which they're in, because when you're in charge, you own everything that happens. It's on your timetable, your watch. I didn't know what to do. I think the best president, if we had to say, had to put someone who was gracious, kind, didn't speak much. A lot of presidents speak too much. They got to always say something. I'm sensitive to the media, for sure. You see that in your book, On the Banks of the Potomac. I am sensitive to the news media. I don't think if I was president today, I could make it because I'd be too enamored to say something back to the media. But I think Calvin Coolidge would probably be the best president for a couple reasons. He had a strong delineation of the three branches of government: the legislative, the judicial, and the executive. And with Andrew Mellon, he balanced the budget. Another simple reason is he didn't want to be king. When Harding passed away, he then became president for 2 years, and then he ran in 24, became president again, and he could have ran again and became president, but he didn't. It shows humility. It shows he knew it was his time. He could have changed the course of this republic, but he knew he had to do the right thing. And Calvin Coolidge is probably one of the best presidents in the last 100 years. And in 2024, 100 years from Calvin, I have an idea who's going to be president, but we have yet to see. I think the second president would probably be Donald Trump, simply for the fact of what he did for the American people so that they could really thrive in the economy, so that they could really thrive and do things for their communities, really care about people of all different walks of life, and all different lifestyles of living. He, he liked the camera for sure, to talk to the media, to tell it like it is. And that's what you need. In today's culture, I see you need a president who's going to tell it like it is and not kowtow to the media, to big tech, to big pharma. It's not fair what they're doing to him right now in 2023. And I think during COVID, he didn't know what to do. He probably had an idea, but how could he know? People are so upset that he was president, but it's the ideas that people like. And when I was founding this country with my associates and colleagues, I didn't intend for lifelong politicians like the Bushes and the Clintons and the Obamas to be president forever. to after being president, you then still have your tentacles in politics. Retire, live your life, go on a vacation. But POTUS 45 did what he needed to do, what he thought he knew best. He didn't know, just like I didn't know during 2020 for COVID or 2019 for COVID. He didn't know. He he owns it to a degree. He owns his presidency to a degree. So I think also Donald Trump is against the globalists and the Federal Reserve. That's another reason why I like him, because I regret starting the National Bank with Alexander Hamilton. And I think a reason why Donald Trump got elected is simply because you think after all these legacy presidents, the Bushes, the Clintons, the Obamas, that people weren't and were not sick and tired of not being able to get ahead. Obama expanded the size of government for someone else to come in and really decimate this country. And that's why they intended for Clinton to become president. But they weren't aware of what the citizens really wanted. Those people were out of touch. They have all this technology and they were out of touch. If I had a news anchor to interview me that was on the big stage, I'd probably choose Megyn Kelly. I would choose Tucker Carlson because they don't hold back. They ask tough questions and they know their truth, but they know what the American people want to hear. Those are people I'd want to be interviewed by. And Charlie Kirk from Turning Point USA, because he is our generation. And you know what, John? Charlie Kirk should interview you. Tyler Bauer should interview you as well. They don't know what they're missing. Our conversation backstage before this whole interview was better than the interview itself. I think that the POTUS 1 perspective is something that's lost in today's culture. Well, John, I actually have one more president that I think did a really good job, as best as they could. I think Jack Kennedy, JFK as people call him, did a really great job in fighting the globalists in the speeches he made right before Dallas, and also fighting the Federal Reserve. And I think that that kind of relates to Donald Trump fighting the globalists and the Federal Reserve as well. So, yeah, JFK definitely is a really great president, and what he exemplified as having dignity in the executive office, fighting the tentacles of the military industrial complex. It makes sense to me why you chose Coolidge and Kennedy and President Trump as your top three presidents, because Coolidge made sure that there was a delineation of the three branches of government so they can stay in their lane and work best at what they were made for. And with Kennedy and President Trump, the two things is they were against the globalists and the intelligence agencies in their time and their culture, because they wanted to control the United States through big pharma and through the military industrial complex. And they also, both of them, were very against the federal banking system and the Federal Reserve, and bringing us back to the standard of what we had before the Organic Act of 1871, and before the, I guess you could say, the creature on Jekyll Island was born. And with that being said, what is one thing that you could say of having hope for the United States Republic? That's the best question you've asked me. But I have a question for you. What stirs the soul to action? What habits will posterity take into account that we stand and withstand the wiles of free will, the enemies of this republic? What satisfies the soul, but only the sustenance to live powerful and valiant for our Creator? God has not forsaken this great land to the unredeemed. Our Heavenly Father has placed the protection of these United States in the hands, the dreams, and the actions of courageous patriots, valiant mothers, and brave fathers. Words do not mean anything unless backed up by action. Posterity will look back and ask, did we stand when our time was called to protect this country? Did we go to those school board meetings? Did we get involved in our community? The obelisks of lies that are told in the media will certainly destroy this country if we allow it. The freedom of will our enemy lusts after, like a heathen caught in a fire. They are only but jealous of the free will our Heavenly Father has given to us, because those heathen are caught in their torture, their self-inflicted pain, and their jealousy. We command with confidence our spiritual authority, knowing when there are 10,000 against us on every side, in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye, our Heavenly Father will be there. So yes, I do have hope for this country, for this republic. But our mothers, our fathers, our citizenry have to show up and stand up for each other and for the Constitution, unbiasedly for each other. And like I said, politicians, we are not kings made out of marble, but flesh doing the Lord's bidding. So thank you, John, for this opportunity to be interviewed, and I hope to be interviewed by many more people. So thank you for this opportunity to share minds, share ideas, share hearts, and I look forward to another interview with you, and thank you. Thank you very much for watching this interview with me and George Washington about my new book, On the Banks of the Potomac. It's available on Amazon in paperback and hardcover in the books category. Again, thank you so much for watching this. There will be more interviews with me and George Washington to come.